We obviously use a lot of data sheets in ABA, but which ones should we use for different situations? Hi, I'm Shira.
And I'm Shayna. We're behavior analysts that create weekly content about how to teach children with autism so that they make real progress. And we create shareable resources to make your job just a little easier. Today's topic is all about ABA data sheets. And if you want more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on new video releases.
So data are only as helpful as we use them. One example of how I started using data is I started a 4-week weightlifting program with my workout app. And at the beginning of the program, they make you go through like a baseline where you have to do the exercise repeatedly for a certain amount of time with a certain amount of weight. And you do that now, and we do it again in 4 weeks. So I chose to like write down how many reps I was able to do and how much weight I was able to hold, with the goal of being able to see how much progress I can make in a couple weeks. And that's essentially a data sheet.
Sometimes I write things down on my phone, and that is essentially a data sheet. It's data sheets don't have to be hard, I think is what we're trying to say. It can be very basic. It's really about what information do you need and how do you need to see it?
And data sheets really need to reflect the teaching environment that they're being used in. So a classroom data sheet is going to look very different than a one-to-one style data sheet. A data sheet being given to parents is going to look very different than a data sheet on behavior management, on collecting data on challenging behavior. And it also has to be specific to the person collecting that data. If you know that someone really struggles with a certain kind of data collection, like if it's a new teacher and they're not familiar with probe data, then maybe we give them a different style of data. So there's no right or wrong way to collect data. It's only going to be as useful as we make it.
I remember towards the beginning of my career, I was going into a school to observe a student there, and they were engaging in certain negative behavior. So I needed to get some information from the teacher, and I said, "Here, can you please fill out this ABC data sheet? And when you're doing the B column, the behavior column of the data sheet, please record frequency and duration in there as well, so that I can get an overall picture of the behavior. That would be awesome. Here you go. Thank you. If that's too hard for you, write it in a notebook or do something like that." And I came back a couple weeks later to follow up, and everything was blank. And the teacher said, "I'm not doing this. I have a class of 30 kids, and you're asking me to write reams and reams of data. I can't do that in a classroom." And that's a rookie mistake, right? It's something that you think, oh, of course, I mean, as an ABA therapist, working one-to-one in a home, I fill out ABA data sheets all the time. So, of course, a teacher, anyone can do this. It's super easy. Just do it. And then you forget they're teaching most of the day. And, if negative behavior occurs, they can't stop everything and say, "Oh, 30 kids, put your life on hold while I go write a novel in this notebook." So, we developed a data sheet together, and we came up with an ABC check-off data sheet so that when some negative behavior occurred, she just had to go check, check, check. And that was the data. And lo and behold, I came back a couple weeks later and there were data. So it wasn't the fact that the teacher, wanted to sabotage things or didn't want to give me the information. It's just that teacher was really super overwhelmed. And I think this happens a lot more than what we think. So, when we're talking about data sheets, we need to really look at the end user and who's using the data sheet, and making it doable for that person to collect the data.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you a secret. We are always going to care more about data than anyone else who's interacting with this kid. So while it seems really easy and really meaningful to us, we have to think about who is the person collecting this data, and making it doable for them. Sometimes we'll create data sheets that really have more the therapist or the teacher in mind, even than the learner, because while it may be great to get full percentage data because we'd like to see all that information, if the therapist might really be struggling with that, then we may create a different kind of data sheet, or we may create a data sheet that the learner doesn't even need, more for the therapist's accountability or for therapists to be able to follow those kind of instructions. So as a BCBA, you're always thinking about those factors when you're thinking about choosing the style of measurement and the kind of data sheet.
I have a home team that I'm working with right now, and they're phenomenal people. But we have a whole bunch of programs that have been taught in the past, and they're really maintenance programs. We really don't need data on these programs anymore because the students mastered them. But they still need to be run, and they still need to be run for generalization purposes. And it's a matter of just run them. So we really have just a running list of some maintenance generalization programs, and it's just a check off if done. And it's really great because that in and of itself is data. I don't need whether the learner got 80% or 100% or 50%. I need, did you do it? Great, you ran it that day. Awesome. Oh, you didn't? Okay, the therapist who comes in the next day can see that it wasn't run and they make sure that they do that maintenance program, and it's just check off if done. And sometimes that's all you need for certain pieces of data.
And our message is always going to be that the teaching, the play, the engagement always matter more than the data. And remember, I just said data is going to be so important to us. But as important as it is, we never want the data to take over to the point that it's interfering with a teacher or a therapist really getting in there and engaging and teaching. So we're also keeping that in mind when we're creating a data sheet, is that we don't want them to be busy with us. So we want to create a system where they can still be busy with the student and busy with the child and interacting with them, but also giving us the information that we need.
And that's the hard part, is finding that delicate balance between learning and getting the data you need. And I've always said, if in doubt, our main goal is we're in it for the client. We need to be there to teach. So, if in doubt, throw down your pencil, throw down your pen, throw down your electronic data collection system and teach. And we can catch the data up. And what do I mean by that? We mean, well, you can do cold probes, which means, every so often you probe. So maybe Fridays are probe days instead, so that you're teaching the rest of the time. Or you find some other kind of data collection system, like a rating scale data, where you just have to go back at the end and rate how well that kid did. It's subjective, but at least it's some kind of data. So it's a matter of really saying, okay, let's get these goals met. And if the data are too cumbersome and you can't collect it, then, there's really no point in taking data, because I don't want to be able to read and analyze 0% for 20 days in a row, because that's not meaningful either.
So to all the BCBAs out there, please be creative. Do not be stuck to a certain style of data sheet, and then only needing to give that one over. You can be as creative as your therapist and your client needs you to be to get that information.
So when creating data sheets, let's think about our end goal first of all. So what do you really want to learn from the data? So, I really need to know how often the student is erroring on X, Y, or Z. I really need to know where that breakdown occurs, or I really need to know how many times a student has engaged in this positive behavior or negative behavior. Or I need to compare and contrast, how many times they're prompted versus unprompted. So really asking yourself these questions, like, what do you need to know? Because another, we talk about data can be cumbersome, and we've walked into ABA programs before, we've walked into classrooms before, group homes before, where all of these data are collected and never analyzed because it's too much information and we really don't need to know it. But all of a sudden, we've got all these data on things that aren't meaningful, and everyone's overwhelmed with collecting data that they forget to teach, or they forget that there's a client on the other end. So really asking yourself, what's important? What do you need to look at? What's the end goal? And then working backwards from there.
Yes, we're going to go over a few of the traditional styles of data sheet and kind of go over some pros and cons and when you might choose them, always keeping that end goal in mind when you're thinking about, what do I need to know? What is this information? The first thing is, when we talk about behavior data, our go-to is usually an ABC data sheet. And like Shana was saying earlier, it doesn't have to look like a free form or a journal. It could be a really simple, check off. You can collaborate with the teacher in picking what those options are, so you can make it very individualized to that student and that classroom. So it doesn't either. There isn't one style of ABC data sheet. There's many styles, and pick the one or create the one that's going to work best. And when we say ABC, it's really just to give us information. We always say collect that data just for a couple days. It shouldn't be weeks and months of ABC data. You want to get that information so that you can turn it into something meaningful, a plan, or whatever else that might look like.
That's one of my biggest pet peeves, is going in and seeing reams and reams of ABC data sheet that's being collected for months and months on end. You really want to just collect that information, at the beginning so that you can really say, okay, what are the triggers? What is a function that I can test afterwards? And that's really the purpose of an ABC. So if you've been collecting ABC data for longer than about a week, ask yourself why, and ask yourself if there's something else you can do instead that's a lot less cumbersome and gives you even a better answer.
And then if you're teaching any kind of routine, that the end goal is independence. It could be really at any age or stage, but we think mostly about life skills. But it could be tying shoes, hand washing, a morning routine. It could be doing laundry, any one of those things that there isn't a clear one behavior. It's really a chain of behaviors where the end goal is often some form of independence. We all often use some sort of task analysis. And then the task analysis is the data sheet. The teaching style would be forward chaining or backward chaining or total task presentation. Check out our other blogs on chaining and podcasts on that topic. But the data sheet would look like a breakdown of the different steps within that larger scale and where they're at in terms of independence with each one of those steps.
We also talk about percentage data sheets, and percentage data sheets are really great, especially when you're doing any type of discrete trial teaching at the table or in the national environment. You need to know, okay, over these 5 trials, how often did the student engage in this behavior, or how often did the student get this correct? So really percentage correct. I like to use percentage correct a lot as well, because, sometimes I'll put in place, did you do this program? Yes or no, but you don't know how many trials have been run. So a percentage data will give you a percentage, but it also shows you how many trials were done so that you know, okay, the student isn't learning this because there was only 2 trials done in an entire day. Or, oh, look, the student's rate of acquisition is pretty high because we've got a lot of trials in. And that's what percentage data will be able to give you as well.
And percentage data is great when you have that control over how many trials were presented. But often I see people choosing percentage data and they're not really taking data on the times they got it wrong. And so really they're not looking for percentage data, but percentage data is great for like, I'm taking data on these 10 trials and I'm going to get percentage data. But something like, greeting their peer 80% of the time, are you really looking every time they're not greeting their peer and counting that? So percentage data is not the be all and end all, even though it's very common. There are a lot of other options.
We talk about frequency as well, and frequency can be, in combination with percentage, or frequency can be on its own. So I think about manding, for instance, or requesting. And a lot of time people will carry around a clicker or a counter and they'll count how many independent mans someone gets. But oftentimes I see, people carrying around 2 or 3 or 4 clickers. And if you've heard me talk before, I always say, I can't handle 4 clickers. I just can't do it. But even if you have 2 clickers, one for, independent mans and one for prompted mans, then from there you can get not only a frequency count of, independent versus prompted, but you can also get percentage, because overall I promoted 50 mans today in my session, and 20 of them were independent. So therefore I got a percentage of this.
Yeah, frequency is a great measure. It's very often used for, behavior, like how often is this tantrum happening or how often are they, showing aggression. But it could also be great for skills that we want to increase. How often are they asking for help? If it's only twice a day, can we get it up to 5 times a day? How often are they making comments or greeting somebody? These skills don't need to be percentage. It's just get that frequency count and keep trying to increase it. With that, you can also get rate. Rate is great for anything that really needs to be, fluent or quick. You might get words they can read per minute. You can also get the rate of challenging behavior if that's relevant to you, like how many instances per hour, or if that's meaningful. So there's so much you can do with frequency, and it's easy to collect. So we often use frequency as a measure.
Another one that's really easy to collect is cold probe data. And that's really just a yes or no. Did it happen? Did it not happen? A lot of times I'll take first trial correct data, look at me, first trial data, which is either just a yes or no. So the very first time I present something that day, did the student get the correct answer, yes or no? Or, did the behavior in question occur, yes or no? Did they say hi when someone walked in the room, yes or no? So really just a probe of correct or incorrect responses at the beginning of a session. And that's really easy because the data are not cumbersome whatsoever. It's really quick, really great for classroom situations, really great for net teaching. There is a downside, and I mentioned that with the percentage data, that if you're doing cold probe data and only that, maybe therapists aren't getting in enough trials. Maybe they're only doing 1 or 2 trials and getting, the one probe data and that's it, and they're not teaching. So just be aware of that. If you're seeing a whole bunch of no's over time, ask yourself, well, maybe it's because the trials aren't there. They're not getting those trials in. The other unfortunate part about the yes no data is that you're not able to see some of those nuances. And I can give you an example of that. Right now, I am doing a tolerates vehicle program with one of the individuals I work with. He has been at home since the pandemic and will not go in a vehicle at all. And so he's literally like imprisoned himself at home. So what we've done is we are now getting him to tolerate going in the vehicle. And then eventually what we want to do is have him go for a ride and get his most preferred items when he's out at a drive-through somewhere. Anyway, we've got right now in place a data sheet that's a yes no. So did he get into the van? And if he got into the van, then did he go for that ride? But unfortunately, it's not showing those nuances. So the very first day we did it, he walked by the van, but he wouldn't get in. And then by the second day, he was putting his foot in the van and sometimes hopping into the van, but then getting right back out. Anyways, I'm really happy to report yesterday. I didn't even tell you this. Yesterday, he got in the van, he went for a ride. I'm so excited. But if we were just doing that yes, no data, his data for 8 days in a row would have looked like no, 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 and then a yes. Whereas, so what we did after the second day, because we realized it's not showing us those nuances, is we created a task analysis and we said, okay, here's the different steps. Where is he? What's he doing and what's he not doing? It gave us better information.
Another option is interval data sheets. Those give us an idea of whether a behavior is happening in the whole interval recording, the partial interval, or momentary time sampling, if it just happens at any point. Now, there's a lot of great information we can get from interval data sheets. Sometimes they can be a little bit more cumbersome because you do have to have that availability of the data sheet handy and recording. If it is happening a lot, then you might be using that data sheet a lot. But it really does give a lot of good information of frequency, duration, and time of day very often with those kind of data sheets. So they are very valuable if you have the manpower for that. It is one that we like using.
One of the very first centers I ever worked in, we did interval recording, and we literally had a timer that was going off every single minute. And at the end of that minute, we had to look to see whether or not the child engaged in that behavior during that minute. And so it's partial interval recording. It wasn't as the timer went off, but so did the child engage in that negative behavior during that 1 minute? And oh my gosh, there were timers going off every minute. And then you think about it, we were in a classroom situation and we had 5 learners, and at any given time, there was 2 or 3 learners who were on an interval recording schedule. So you had these timers going off all the time, and it was really hard to do because it was very cumbersome. So what I love doing a partial interval recording data sheet, having the data sheet, and then just saying to the therapist or the teacher, okay, if negative behavior occurs, define negative behavior, obviously, but when this behavior occurs, just look at your watch and then write down the time on the data sheet and check it off. And then, when the behavior stops, write down the time on the data sheet. And then what you can see is on this partial interval recording data sheet, you can see, how long, so the duration, how long the negative behavior occurred for. But also, if you look at that data sheet over an entire session, you can also see frequency of, okay, it happened 5 different times throughout session. And if you look at these data sheets over time, sometimes it can also give you a pattern of, oh, wow, it always occurs around 11 o'clock in the morning. Interesting, because lunch is at 11:30. Maybe this kid is hungry and maybe, he needs to eat a snack before lunchtime. Or, oh, wow, it's always happening at 9:30 in the morning, right after drop off. So you can sometimes look at that pattern as well. So I love partial interval recording data when it's not attached to a timer going off every single minute.
Speaking of duration is also very meaningful as a measure for a data sheet because very often if you're collecting behavior data, we sometimes collect frequency. That's often what ABC data give us. And if you're just collecting frequency, some of our students show behaviors, once or twice a day. And the behaviors could last, up to 45 minutes or even longer. And so if you're working on improving that behavior, it may still be happening once or twice a day. If you're only collecting frequency data, you might not be able to see any progress. But if you're also collecting duration data and the behaviors are happening for a short amount of time, the duration is decreasing, then even if it's still happening the same frequency, but the duration is decreasing, that's very meaningful. So it is important to, when we have, often behaviors that don't happen often, but happen for long periods of time, we'll collect duration data, but it's not just for challenging behavior. You collect duration data for skills you want to increase also, like time on task or sitting at circle time. Those are skills that involve a duration of time that you want to increase.
So I learned that the hard way as well. We had a behavior program in for a kid I used to work with years ago. And what we saw is we implemented treatment and actually the frequency increased. We were just taking frequency data and the frequency of the negative behavior actually increased. And our graph was going in the wrong direction. But I was the therapist at the time and I was saying, but no, 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 the negative behavior is going down. I swear, it's going down. And, the person on the team was saying, no, it's not, like it's actually increasing. Look at the graph. And so I was an advocate for putting in duration data as well. And what we saw that, at the very beginning, the duration of these tantrums, like Shira said, they can last upwards of 45 minutes. And by the end, the student unfortunately was having, more bursts of negative behavior, but the negative behavior was happening for 30 seconds to a minute instead of 45 minutes in duration. So sometimes that can occur as well.
One of the data sheets we love is our rating scale data sheet. We love this especially for early learners, if we're really focused on engagement and play, so that you don't have to be too involved with taking the data. The nice thing is that you can define the rating scale however you want, whatever information you want to get out of that. It could be on level of independence, level of engagement, level of resistance, however you want to define that rating scale. You can give it to someone to record. They don't have to record it in the moment. We can make the criteria, broad enough so at the end of the day, they can look back and think, how engaged was the student? How much interaction did I get? How was their play? And we can get a lot of really good information using rating scale data, both in classrooms. We use it a lot for group activities. If we're collecting information on how they're doing in a group, then we'll often use rating scale data. And it is one of my favorite forms of data collection.
I love it because instructors can actually throw down their pen, throw down their electronic data collection and just teach. And I love that. So for more information on choosing the right data collection method, we have another video, so check that out. And you can also check out our blog on that as well.
For more information on ABA data sheets, click the link on or around this video or in the description to claim your data collection methods freebie. We also encourage you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos, and leave a like and comment below if you have further questions.